November 8, 1942, the Mediterranean. 11 months after Pearl Harbor, more than 800 ships engaged in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. The plan called for tactical air support for the ground forces. Some of the air units were ferried from England and the States by carriers.
We had 70 Warhawks on a U.S. flat top, 25 more on a British carrier. We liked this plane. The Curtiss P-40 could carry a 500-pound bomb as easily as a belly gas tank. It was both a fighter and a bomber. Now, inspired by Doolittle's Tokyo raid, land-trained fighter pilots, because their planes were urgently needed, were risking carrier takeoffs to get to Morocco. At 2- and 3-minute intervals, we raced down the short deck and grabbed for air. Felt like someone pulled the runway out from under us awful fast. We cleared the decks and buzzed the carriers for luck. Then the entire group, led by Colonel Bill Momeyer, headed for the already battle-scarred landing fields of French Morocco. General Eisenhower came up for a look-see at our forward command post. Allied forces had rolled over the opposition and moved halfway across North Africa, only to grind to a halt because of weather and the lack of supplies. We were almost within sight of the enemy's big supply ports in Tunisia. However, logistics and mud dictated the decision. On General Eisenhower's order, positions were consolidated and the attack was postponed indefinitely. The mountains, the roads, even the air seemed to ooze with 6 weeks of steady rain. No motor transportation. Wheels went no place. Only a few meager supplies got through. For once, like the foot soldier, air support, the umbrella for our ground forces, was stuck in the mud.
The enemy was in much better shape. They had hundreds of planes operating from permanent all-weather fields. Their veteran, battle-trained Luftwaffe was sure of easy victory over inexperienced American air units. Allied harbors and airfields were primary targets. Air defenses were weak, open for Stuka dive bombing and strafing. After plastering Allied supply harbors, they attacked airfields. Air units doggedly held on while even the ground seemed to rise and burn under repeated attacks. The Allies suffered losses, and even as they rescued their wounded, new and faster ways were improvised to carry casualties to safety. The planes which had brought in high-priority supplies took out higher-priority men. They were attended by flight nurses. With air evacuation, casualties were only hours from hospitals, even home. But wounded men and planes had to be repaired. American ingenuity went to work. Salvaged parts and new ideas made crude gasoline firebombs. The Allies rebuilt their strength.
General Ike had planned strategy with his air, ground, and naval officers. We worked out the best ways of using our combined forces. General Spaatz was named CO of the Northwest African Air Force. Generals Arnold, Royce, and Brereton visited our outfit, the 12th Air Force Fighter Command, run by General Pete Quesada. The brass were helping us get on even terms with the Luftwaffe. Army transport boys tripled railway capacity. A while back, we'd nearly run out of 500-pounders, but now we had plenty. Gasoline rationed at home meant life or death in the desert. The battle for supply was being won. We were getting ready.
Suddenly, on February 14th, Rommel's Africa Corps attacked. At Kasserine Pass, Allied lines stiffened. After 8 days of attack, the Axis initiative was exhausted. It was at this point that Rommel quit his African command.
For the enemy, the situation worsened. Gasoline shortages reduced air operations. Squeezed into a steadily smaller pocket, they prepared to evacuate planes and key personnel to Sicily. About 20 men could escape in a Junker 52.
High above them, the Allies watched and waited. Something big was coming. The German escape plan was put in motion. Near Tunis rose a group of more than 30 heavily armored Me-109 fighters. They were to escort a large fleet of slow-flying 52s. The hop to Sicily was a shuttle run of about 100 miles, less than an hour. 100 strong, the transport stretched in a long line on the deck, headed for their Sicilian sanctuary.
They didn't get very far. As soon as our 57th Fighter Group spotted them, Captain Jimmy Curl's squad of 13 P-40s dove on the enemy to split them up. We had been chasing Germans since July 1942. But we never had a chance like this famous afternoon. Down below, the transports droned on. If their luck held, the Germans might make a getaway. Their luck ran out. Tail-end Charlies of the long escape line took their chances on getting back to their Cape Bon airdromes. Some of them made it the hard way. When the attack was over, we had destroyed 58 transports and 18 fighters. Lieutenants Duffy, Powers, and Cleveland each clobbered 5 transports. From then on, we sat over German airdromes and dared the Luftwaffe to come up.
But the Axis still had a trump card. The Africa Corps blocked the way to Tunis. The Allies probed, seeking weak spots. Finding some, they shifted forces, building for a breakthrough. Montgomery's army hammered the Africa Corps from the south. Allied artillery tried to give the ground forces a toehold on the corridor to Tunis. But Monty's 8th Army was effectively pinned down by the Africa Corps.
On the morning of May 6th, they called for tactical air support. Weather was good. We had gasoline and bombs, planes and men. We were ready. The Northwest African Tactical Air Force drew up a schedule for an unprecedented weight of air attack. The heavies were first to give depth to the artillery barrage. They ordered us to concentrate on an area 4 miles long by 3.5 miles wide. We had 12th Air Force bomber boys who had started in the muddy fields of Algeria. They were teamed up with 9th Air Force men who had eaten sand all the way from Egypt, 1,500 miles. Before 9 o'clock, we had planned to fly more than 1,000 sorties. Anything that could take off went up to the corridor. Our fighter-bomber boys, including the 57th Group of Cape Bon fame, were about to sweep a road to Tunis. We were using the experience gained in Egypt, smashing Rommel at El Alamein. Then we were only a few. Now we were hundreds, all grouped in a powerful package. General Alexander's armies were anxious for the air attack, which would mean a breakthrough. They didn't have long to wait. to the channel from Medjez El Bab to Tunis. In 2 hours, tanks and infantry had advanced as much as a mile. Resistance began to crack. Fire bombs, which we had tested in the Sahara, helped in the big show. The Germans, realizing their desperate situation, retreated to make a last-ditch stand.
Finally, the Allied armies broke through. From here on, Alexander mopped up with fire. At last, the Allies could see Tunis. This was the first flush of victory. A year and a half after Pearl Harbor, only 6 months after the landing. Allied soldiers, tankmen, and airmen were liberators, like the American Marines who had brought peace to North Africa more than a century before. There were salutes to liberty as tyranny disappeared. The citizens of Tunis cheered the crusade for freedom, but now had a new champion, Allied air power. 250,000 prisoners proved that Nazi invincibility was a myth. In the German defeat, we learned the strength of joint unified command. Allied air power had destroyed enemy planes, guns, and ships, which paved the way for the final destruction of Hitler's once proud and powerful Africa Corps. As designer of the Tunisian victory, General Eisenhower reviewed the United Allies who were at last upon the march. The world had seen the first large-scale application of complete air supremacy. We had battle-tested and developed tactical air support for our ground forces. Later chapters will show the lessons of North African air warfare applied on a global scale with the steadily increasing manpower, plane power, and firepower of the United States Air Force. (1943) Army Air Force graduation exercises at Tyndall Field, Florida. From the start, France and 30 other Allied nations sent many of their airmen to the United States to learn how to fly, to fire a gun, or check an engine. In fact, the Air Training Command used about 1/3 of its facilities for this program to help build the United Nations Air Team. As one product of the AAF educational effort, which developed into the greatest training program in all history, French cadet Henri Chevanier was awarded gunner's wings. Pilot wings went to another cadet whose entire class was destined to join the Chinese-American composite wing of the 14th Air Force under the command of General Claire Chennault. And so the young men from Great Britain, Netherlands, East Indies, Central and South America, by graduating in the United States and by fighting in Europe and Asia, demonstrated the Army Air Force's unique contribution to the total war effort of the United Nations.
Of the 475 training command bases we had, the Officer Candidate School of the AAF at Miami Beach, Florida, was devoted to turning out administrative officers. We wanted men from every walk of life who could handle responsibilities. By the end of 1943, we knew the AAF was going to have more than 158,000 planes and more than 2 million specialists around the world.
Only 23 out of every 1,000 applicants were finally chosen as candidates. Meet the cream of the crop.
The man on the left was the national intercollegiate high jump champ. The one on the right served under Chennault in China with the American Volunteer Group.
Elmer E. Meadows was once the world's champion pole vaulter. He won the 1936 Olympic title in Berlin.
The fellow on the left was rescued off Corregidor, the other a symphony conductor.
D.R. Delano, fifth cousin to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
A trapeze artist with Ringling Brothers Circus. On the right, the mayor of Glen Cove, Long Island.
This former Austrian attorney spent quite a while in a Nazi concentration camp.
A gunner with the RAF, and a Broadway playwright.
Gilbert Rowland of Hollywood. He used to have a mustache, remember?
These men wore the Order of the Purple Heart. One got his at Pearl Harbor, the other in the Battle of Verdun.
Robert Meservey. You knew him as Robert Preston.
Two tigers, one from Burma, a member of the Flying Tigers. On the right, catcher for the Detroit Tigers.
This man was cited for bravery at Pearl Harbor.
First bombardier to touch Midway, Wake, and Guam. Right, the AAU light heavyweight champion.
William H. Jordan, bombardier in the Battle of Midway. Those medals are for sharpshooting.
The fellow with glasses was an ecologist. He worked for the United States Department of Agriculture. For 14 years, he had done research with the sugar beet leafhopper. In fact, he knew more about the sugar beet leafhopper than anyone else in the world. The other fellow was a champion high jumper. Because Hap Arnold knew that Hitler wouldn't wait for us to build a ground officers' school, he had General Weaver lease 300 Miami Beach hotels, and we were in business almost at once. In hotels like the Governor, we housed our students. Better than a tent, but no vacation. We gave each prospective officer a reliable chambermaid, himself. No wrinkles in those beds, blankets tight enough to bounce a coin. Shoes shined and lined up, dresser drawers staggered and open. Socks rolled, personal articles arranged according to student order. Student orders, the Bible. No dust in this room. Bed made like the book says. We allowed them 7 hours sleep. They were lucky if they managed 5. They studied instead. Each man's clothes were hung in the same order. All buttons were buttoned, each and every button. No drop of water in sink or tub. All bright work polished, highly polished.
So were the men, all spit and polish, and their spirit was high. During the 12 weeks, they crammed in enough schoolwork to equal a year at college. In concentrated education, they studied chemical warfare, air and naval intelligence, administration, aircraft identification, mess management, supply, military law, and 27 more subjects. At West Point, many of these courses took a year of study, but America was at war.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Away, break!
After improving their minds, we improved their bodies. This was all part of the Air Force X-ray machine that revealed washouts as well as leaders.
Finally, it was graduation. Everyone came out for the show. The guest speaker was the old man himself, General Hap Arnold. He flew down from Washington just to address the class. That was quite an honor. Today, the cream of the crop had a right to be proud. This cross-section of America had been through something, and they had made the grade. After 3 grueling months, they earned that commission in the Army of the United States. For a few of the men, there were special honors. A sense of achievement. Some won awards for sports, but every graduate now had poise and confidence. OCS turned out leaders of men who could share the nation's responsibilities. For many, the oath marked the start of a new career in the service of the nation. But in spite of the joy of the graduation moment, the Air Force would have been nothing without the devotion, anger, and bitter pride of the great American people engaged in a war for freedom. Love and pride were as much a part of the Air Force as money and planes. Now, after a desperate year and a half of war, the AAF was about to fulfill an historic and decisive mission. In another part of the world, on the Mediterranean, plans for Operation Corkscrew moved ahead as the British 1st Division convoys prepared to embark from ports in Africa for Pantelleria. The island, with underground hangars and natural defenses, was regarded by Mussolini as the Italian Gibraltar. General Jimmy Doolittle warned his men that conquest of the volcanic rock might prove expensive. The enemy had 900 planes within range and 80 major gun emplacements on the island. Briefings for 9th Air Force fighter pilots, now attached to the Northwest African Tactical Force, were carefully guided by General Louis Brereton. The all-out air attack on the island had been recommended by his boss, General Carl Spaatz.
For Operation Corkscrew, the brass gave us slightly more than 1,000 fighting planes of every type. They felt our combined air forces had at last grown to a point where we could chance the first Allied attempt to conquer enemy territory essentially by air action. According to plan, for 18 continuous days during the first phase of the campaign, we had battered the fascist fortress with heavy raids. Photo Recon reported that our work was effective. Mussolini's Gibraltar was now set up for the knockout punch. In a couple of weeks, our boys in the Northwest African Air Forces were changing the concepts of war. From African bases, where American air power had achieved co-equal status with land power, Phase 2 of Operation Corkscrew got underway on 6 June. As our heavies joined the show, the plan called for an around-the-clock assault to continue with growing intensity for 5 more days. The Allied command was about to unleash the full force of its air power. In all, 1,100 planes were participating in today's climactic assault. They were prepared to drop 1,571 tons of bombs. That meant better than 23 tons of destruction per acre. High on the target list were Pantelleria's shore batteries. To the air attack, the enemy's flak guns were inaccurate, but they kept trying for a lucky hit. In 6 days and nights, we had dropped almost 5,000 tons of high explosives, achieving a concentration on military objectives greater than any we had ever attempted. Twice, the island was offered a chance to surrender. When Pantelleria showed no sign of quitting, B-17s were ordered to resume the bombing. It was then that our planes spotted a white flag flying from Semaphore Hill. Allied air forces had bombed the island into submission.
As a result, the invasion fleet met practically no opposition. Regarding the operation, a British Joint Committee reported, in effect, active resistance on Pantelleria had ceased when our amphibious forces arrived. Not a Tommy or a GI got his feet wet. From here on, it was a routine operation. Immediately, the Allies began to prepare the island for its part in the invasion of Sicily. For the second time, Axis might was reduced to rubble, and strutting supermen became beggars with surrender flags. Troops quickly poured ashore. They were amazed at the extent of the destruction. The remains of the enemy's air defense was strewn along the beaches, while the only landing casualty was a British infantryman who was nipped by a local jackass. By the time of the Sicilian campaign, Pantelleria had become a full-fledged Allied air base. The Allies could now place a strong defensive air arm over the Sicilian Narrows. The sea route from Gibraltar to Alexandria could be kept open. Operation Corkscrew not only paid dividends, but because it proved the power of air bombardment to force a defended area to capitulate, it was destined to become a military classic in the history of the United States Air Force.